Okay, today we have another special guest. I'm so lucky on the Yukon Strong podcast here. We have CPC leadership candidate Derek Sloan. Hi, Derek. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. I was watching a bit of the recent leadership debate with you guys, and I thought you did really well. I thought you were very well spoken. One thing I noticed, with the so far in the CPC leadership debates is it's so refreshing just to hear political candidates answer the freaking question. Thank you for that. How did you feel the debate went?
Well, the English debate there that we did in Toronto, I was trending number 4 for all of Canada on Twitter the entire evening. And the next person in line was Peter MacKay as 12th, and then Leslyn Lewis as 16th. So I was resonating strongly with Canadians that night, and I felt great. I felt calm and confident, and I thank God, to be honest, for just the peace to be able to share my positions with clarity and with strength.
I think that we're seeing a bit of a shift in the CPC this time around. After what happened with Scheer, true conservatism, pardon me, is starting to creep back into the Conservative Party, which is wonderful. It's been sorely missed, and it's really refreshing. Do you hunt at all?
So I'm a firearms owner, and
Yep.
I shoot. I usually just shoot trap for fun, but I'm not technically a hunter. So
Oh,
I have my restricted license, and I'm a firearms owner, but I'm not really a hunter. So
I just was curious. I figured maybe you were. I got the feeling maybe you were sort of a country farm boy sort of guy. But no, if you're just a restricted owner, that's still awesome.
I am, in fact, a country boy. I live in the midst of farm fields on all sides, and I definitely live in a rural area. And my internet is probably as bad as yours, so it's a good thing that we're doing audio only today. But in terms of and the hunting thing, I got several small kids. We get deer that come right up into our backyard, and I don't want to. The kids love it. I don't really want to scare away the animals, so I'm not a hunter right now, but definitely I'm a rural boy, and have a little tractor. We have a little garden and stuff like that, so it's definitely part of my life.
So I recorded this after the podcast, and Derek, if you're out there listening to this, I just had a thought on how to help your kids with the whole hunting and deer thing in your backyard. I'll tell you what, I'll send you some steaks, man, and you can give them to the kids for dinner. And let me tell you, they may change their tune pretty quick. They'll be like, "Daddy, do we have any more deer sticks?" And you'd be like, "Oh, sorry, sweetie, we're all out." And they'd be like, "Well, how do we get more steaks?" And you say, "Well, we got to go out and go hunting." And they'd be, "Really? I want to go hunting." Well, that's how it happened in my house. I don't know if it'll happen in Derek's house, but the offer's on the table. I feel firearms rights are we're definitely sort of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to civil liberties. How do you sort of feel, on a personal level? How did the recent OIC gun ban make you feel?
Well, it was entirely. The Liberals basically admitted that they were using the tragedy in Nova Scotia as a reason for doing this. I mean, it was timed exactly because of this tragedy. It was of course exactly what we would expect from them, but entirely unfair. And the Liberals always like to use these tragedies for their political advantage, and I think it's disgusting.
I really sympathize with what happened to the people out there in Nova Scotia because, I'm pretty sure that happened in sort of a somewhat rural community. So I envision had I been in their shoes in that situation. And it just, you can set the method of what happened aside with the firearms, with the arson, what it was is senseless killing. But the fact that the killer impersonated an RCMP officer, like I thought to myself, honestly, if a cop car pulled me over, of course I'd pull over. I would. The last thing on my mind would be, defending my life in that situation. And I feel like, he would have got me. And I'm a pretty aware guy. I'm a pretty competent guy, confident in my abilities, to sort of sense danger. I don't know what kind of, defense you can have against that in a society. And then, we look at how the liberals, they just pounced on that. They use that to infringe the rights of every single Canadian. And, even the people out there who don't own firearms, they're losing something here too. Personally, I'm not, against things like gay marriage or anything like that. People want to do what they want to do. Just live and let live. It's not a huge thing for me. But, just because I have no, desire to ever exercise my right to gay marriage, doesn't mean I want to ban it. And, that's kind of what I feel like we're seeing from the political left wing right now. Is anything they disagree with, they want to ban it, they want to cancel it, and they're willing to trample on the rights of other people out of fear of losing their own. It's a bit of a frightening situation, I think, over the long term, what's becoming normalized. And as a restricted owner, you've sort of felt the sting from this now. I've felt that sting too. Gun ownership, we are being criminalized by the government right now. Like, people can say we have systemic racism and all these things however they want. I'm not even going to get into that discussion. But all I know is I do not know any other group in this country who's being criminally targeted by the government right now other than gun owners. We are facing jail time, fines, if we do not do what the government says. And we have committed no harm. The people who have firearms licenses are checked every day. If we break the law, we have the police knocking on our door, very quickly to take our firearms. So it's not as if it's like maybe we're okay. We are okay. And the rest of the population, they are the ones who are not checked. And, in the last, or I don't think it was the last debate, but the one before it, I watched you in the scrum afterwards with the reporters. And by far and away, the reporters were the most hostile to you. They were trying to frame questions, to sort of paint you as a racist or get you to say something that they could use against you. How do you reconcile where the state of free speech is in Canada right now, where the state, of our civil liberties are, and with such a hostile media? How do you think conservatives and Canadians who are tired of this division, how do we move forward and try and take back control?
As far as free speech, we're at a critical point in this country, and free speech and the lack of freedoms that we have is what caused me to get involved in politics. And I believe if we don't do something now, Canada will become unrecognizable very soon. And what we're seeing right now is basically politicians on the left primarily that are using restrictions on free speech to win in politics. They're trying to outlaw conflicting, like alternate political views. So they're using the restriction of liberty to advance their own political agenda. And it's very frightening.
Yeah, it certainly is. Like, I'm just, a Canadian who is fed up and concerned with the destruction I've seen economically in this country and to our civil liberties. And it's becoming a hostile, divided, angry place. It just simply was better before Justin Trudeau came along. And I think it's just another form of censorship. What they're looking to do is shut down, like you said, opposition by, these labels and the assignment of class guilt. And if you really look into that, at a lower level, it's identity politics. And I think that stems from, communism in many ways. If you can label an entire group of people as, oppressors, you can also criminalize them. How do you feel like your campaign's been going so far?
Well, the campaign has actually been going very well. And of course, a grassroots candidate like myself, no one thought I could raise the money and no one thought I would last. But there's been some interesting things that have actually turned out very well for our campaign. The Dr. Theresa Tam thing, where I said that she should be fired, and there was a media barrage on me, really helped cement my position as someone who won't back down. And, as a leadership candidate, you can send out a bunch of emails that sound strong and all that type of thing. But, people need to see what happens when the rubber meets the road. And, when that happened, there was politically correct elements in our own party that were trying to oust me from caucus. And I was able to stand strong and, pardon the pun, stare down the barrel of the gun and say, you know what? I'm not going to apologize when I didn't do anything wrong. I'm not going to apologize for saying something conservative. And that's exactly the type of thing that I feel we do too much and too frequently. And, I'm thankful I had the opportunity to show the conservative membership that I won't back down and that I'm not going to compromise our values just because the media gives us a tough time. And so that really helped propel me forward. And there was a few other skirmishes. I mean, my campaign in many ways has grown off of controversy. And sometimes we don't necessarily need to look for controversy, but controversy will find us in this political environment. And when it does, we can't back down.
I agree 100%. We saw, I think it was yesterday or the day before, Andrew Scheer decided to finally stand up to an increasingly hostile, unfair, and childish media attacks that have been launched at him. And lo and behold, what happens? His clip goes viral. People are sharing it everywhere, cheering him on, saying, "Where was this guy during the last election?" And Andrew, if you're out there listening to this, I have to tell you, man, that kind of truth, that is what Canadians are hungry for. We are so tired of this playing it safe, whatever. We all feel that the other side has become hostile to the point of violence in many cases. They're tearing down statues. They're declaring their own countries in the middle of our country. They're getting people fired. You can live in the shadows and try and be afraid of not offending everyone and being scared of what could happen to you, or you can just stand up and say no. And you saw what happened with Scheer and with you, Derek, when you stood up and held your ground. People quickly back down, and the story changes. Like I said, I think in many cases those reporters asking those questions, if the tables were turned, they're quickly not able to stand up to that same hostility. They are relying on the mob and bullying in order to get the results that they want. And I'll tell you, Derek, I really appreciate how you stood up for yourself there. I don't think you really said anything wrong too. Shortly after that, of course, Dr. Tam's flip-flopping on the issues of masks and all sorts of things. A whole lot of people said, okay, well, wait, what's going on here? And they wound up, agreeing with your initial assessment. So what do you see as Justin Trudeau's biggest failure?
Well, really, I mean, we can talk about specific things but from a, bird's eye view, he has created further division in this country. In fact, he's almost invented the divisiveness that we're seeing today. And he's pitted sections of the country against other sections of the country as part of his plan to win leadership. And I think that is, it's destructive. That's exactly the opposite of what we need to be doing. I mean, he thinks he's building up the country. He's pitting, east against west. He's pitting, ethnic minorities against others. He's pitting, people who are in the LGBT community with those that are, have more traditional views. He's doing everything he can to focus on these identity politics issues, and I think they're tremendously divisive.
Do you think that's potentially a part of his strategy? Like he's trying to fan the flames of a vote split, perhaps between Wexit movement, PPC, the PPC party, and other conservatives, maybe to try and help him have an easier victory next time around?
Yeah, it's tough to say whether it's intentional or just the way he is. But the Liberals are increasingly campaigning on identity politics, and that is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it's really become a problem. Even some of my longest friends, especially with this whole Black Lives Matter movement recently, within my family, we all just disagree on it almost unanimously. Even the people on the same side of sort of the issue, they disagree on how they say, okay, well, yeah, I believe Black Lives Matter and there's been systemic racism, but who are these violent anarchists, and what is looting stores and burning communities have to do with this? And then I have other people in my family that they believe there's some sort of form of systemic racism, but they're like, no, the violence is necessary, and it's ugly, and there's no way to fight oppression other than that. And it just seems, it's like you said, maybe it's how he is, but it's normalizing this idea of class guilt, class victimhood, and class oppression, which pits us all against each other. And ultimately, I think it leads to innocent people on both sides of the argument being targeted and harmed. And, from where I'm standing, I don't feel like racism has been cured after all this. I feel like communities have been destroyed. I feel like the division is higher than it ever has been. And I don't think that the individual actors, out there who are truly racist and trying to harm people because of their race, I don't think they're being punished. It's innocent people who are being punished right now.
Oddly enough, there's many black lives that are being lost as well. There's that poor young girl in Georgia, I believe it was Atlanta, just got shot last week. She was 8 or 9 or 10 years old.
I believe Sequoia Turner was her name.
Yes, that's right. And we're seeing all kinds of people in the inner cities who are being harmed by this. Small businesses that are being, looted and destroyed, owned by African Americans.
It's interesting you bring that up, because we've seen, for instance, the interim Green Party leader, what's her name? Joanne Roberts. This was a recent tweet she put out there. She says, "Fellow white women, we need to step up. Stop calling the BLM protests looting and rioting. Repeat after me. There is no comfortable way to fight oppression. What's happening across the US and Canada is valid, right, and necessary. Get on board." I just imagine what would happen to someone like you or Andrew Scheer or myself if I started a tweet off that says, "Fellow white men." It really wouldn't matter how I finished that sentence. The fact I started it off like that, and then, advocating for violence by the end of the tweet, this is a radical point of view. It's a dangerous point of view, and it's being tweeted by the leader of the far left parties in this country. And there is corresponding violence occurring as a result.
It's really frightening to think that the leader of a national party in Canada could not make a distinction between legitimate protesting and violence. And I think that, frankly, that goes against the tradition of dissent in Canada. And I'm ashamed to hear that she said that.
I agree. And I think, it's not only advocating for violence, it's advocating for race-based violence. And that is the most dangerous form, of thinking. It's the history has shown where that leads. And it's just shocking that, she kind of gets away with that on Twitter. There's no national articles about that. There's no one, condemning her. It's, basically the ultimate, no from their side of the political spectrum, and nothing happens. It's all hugs. Yay! We're stopping racism. No, it's not. You're advocating violence based on racism, and that is going to lead us down a path that I don't think we can recover from. What do you see as a strategy to help repair Canadian unity in spite of all these things? Like you said, we're being pit against each other. What's the way out of it?
Well, the opposite of identity politics, and I may actually be quoting Preston Manning here, and if I am, I'm doing it unwittingly, but I believe he has a term that he calls unity politics. And it's about focusing on Canadians as opposed to focusing on an individual as like a combination of a variety of identity groups. You know what I mean? Like, white or black or male or female or this orientation or that orientation. Instead of subdividing people into different groups and then trying to make them dependent on the government, which is how the Liberals try to win, we need to focus on Canadians as Canadians, and we need to focus on putting Canada first. And I think that is a prime way to unite the country.
I remember growing up, there was songs "Proud to be a Canadian," TV commercials, "I am Canadian." We all felt that pride that we were the best country in the world. We were a united people. I traveled quite a bit in my younger days. I lived overseas for quite a few years, and everywhere I went, people say, "Oh, you're from Canada? Right on." They instantly, they knew Canada was good. They knew we were good people. But more and more, I don't know if that's the case. I spent a couple years in Maui. I had a girlfriend out there for a while, and she worked in the hospitality industry, and she said, I couldn't believe that she said this to me. She said consistently Canadians were becoming ruder and ruder, when they came into guests into the restaurant and stuff. And the hotel staff said that we're horrible tippers, all these things. I was like, are you kidding me? We're like the friendliest people in the world. And sure enough, I talked to her friends. They're like, no, we always try and fight over who doesn't have the Canadian table anymore. And I couldn't believe it. When she said that to me, I'd been walking around the whole planet thinking, everybody loved us and whatever. But in recent years, I think that perception is changing. And I do think it is a result of the narratives that have been set by our political leaders and the media.
We've gotten away from, well, I am Canadian. I think you're right. I think that was a commercial there a while back, where we all used to think in terms of, we didn't really think in terms of male or female or black or white or any of these things. We just thought of, you know what, I'm Canadian. And that's what we need to get back to. The Liberals' strategy of subdividing us all and creating, basically the Liberals want as many different special interest groups as possible, because then they can, hand them a little bit of, a little bit of grease here, a little bit of bacon there, and make them dependent on the government. That's how they win votes. And so we have to get back to focusing on the country as a whole, and get away from these these literally divisive identity politics.
None of this stuff was even on the radar. Like I've never really considered a person's race until these recent years, where it's just like, oh, this and that and that. I'm so tired of it. It's so hateful and it's so negative, and it's draining. I would just like to look at what's wrong with our country and fix it. And what is wrong with our country right now? I think, obviously we're in a fiscal disaster. Derek, I'd love to talk to you more about this sort of philosophical stuff. It's really interesting to me. But, as the CPC leadership candidate, you also have to have a plan for the country. So, what would be the first steps you'd take to sort of get the deficit and this COVID thing under control?
Well, as far as COVID is concerned, I don't believe that we should have shut down completely. We can't be doing that every time a virus from China comes to Canada. And, we've had a variety of scares with, SARS and some of these other viruses. We can't completely shut down the economy. And I think that, we did it for a few months, and we have, $300+ billion in deficit. That's not something we can be doing every 2 years. So, obviously there's people who are immunocompromised and that type of thing. And of course we need to do everything we can to keep them safe. But a complete shutdown for everybody, I don't believe is warranted. When it comes to getting us out of this debt, we need to, there's no magical answer. We have to do what we would do in any event, get our energy sector back on track. I'm the only candidate that says we have to pull out of the Paris Agreement, which is crippling our energy industry. Cut taxes for small business and families to encourage entrepreneurship and growth. Encourage interprovincial free trade. Cut red tape. These are the types of things that we have to do to encourage small business growth and innovation.
I've often thought too that, at least in my neck of the woods up here in the Yukon, the government has really grown in recent years. Like it's expanded to the point where it's driving up home prices up here now and stuff. And I thought something that nobody else has mentioned that might be a good tactic would maybe be a federal hiring freeze. Just let's get the government spending under control, or at least stop it from ballooning for a while, until at least we have our energy sector firing on all gears. I don't understand how this country is going to move forward, without our largest resource getting out there, getting our products to market, ethically, as clean as humanly possible. And without that, if we're gonna shut down oil production, we all remember that when Trudeau said we're gonna phase out the oil sands or whatever. Okay, fine. If that's truly your plan, Mr. Trudeau, what do you have to replace it? You have to have a plan that if this is truly the direction that the government is going to take us, they have to think about the repercussions and solve them before they take place. And it seems like Trudeau's like, yay, here's $1 million for that. Here's $1 million for this. Like he has no plan or strategy whatsoever. I'm dreaming of the day we have a conservative leader back in the office and getting this country back on track. So what about, with the growing Wexit movement in Alberta now, it seems like it's picking up steam. At least on my Twitter feed, a lot of people seem to be they're done. They feel like the solution here is to form a new country with a modern constitution and government structure. Certainly from my perspective, I'm like, wow, that would just be so much easier than fighting over this nonsense all day. But that said, the Clarity Act is a rather large hurdle to overcome, regardless of how, a referendum were to occur. Somehow you're going to have to bring these people back into the tent. How do you reach out to them and make them believe again in, a unified confederation?
Well, the former Wexit leader, Peter Downing, actually put out a few tweets on me, basically saying that in his opinion, I was the only true conservative in the race. And saying that if I didn't win, then Wexit was going to go to work. So for whatever reason, I seem to appeal to many people who are, thinking Wexit or supporting Wexit. It is a major issue, and a lot of people out east don't get it. The fact is that the West has been systematically marginalized for many decades, and getting the oil sector back on track, yeah, that's a good thing, but it's a bare minimum. And it's not enough to deal with Western alienation. We have to look at representation. Alberta and BC are underrepresented in the House of Commons. In fact, if Alberta had the same number of MPs per person as we did in Ontario, they would have 3 or 4 more MPs in the entire province. And the same with BC. BC, I think, might have 4 or 5 more. So we need to make sure that representation is in line. Equalization payments, the way they're calculated, has to be rethought. It's not fair, particularly when so much money is transferring out of Alberta into other provinces like Quebec, and then Quebec is dead set against an oil pipeline. That's just not fair, and no wonder they're upset. We also have to look at, if need be, constitutional changes. When anything to do with the Senate, of course, would involve a constitutional change, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that we bring these people back into the fold.
It is interesting to me that you bring up how people aren't being represented. Well, I'll tell you what, guys, nobody is being represented right now. The House of Commons is shut down. It is Justin Trudeau, I'd argue, essentially basically ruling Canada from his couch. He's probably watching Netflix a lot every day, I would guess. I don't know what he does, but, the bottom line is only his voice is being heard right now, his and his alone. And so it doesn't matter which party you voted for in the last election, your voice isn't being represented any longer. And I do think it is a rather large red flag for everyone on every side of the political spectrum to look at how quickly our democracy has crumbled. From a firearms perspective, he went ahead and he passed this OIC, no vote, no nothing, just said, this is it, it's a ban, blah, blah, blah. That's it. Him. No one else said that. He did. And, when you talk about, modifying the Constitution and doing things like that, do you think maybe you'd be interested in something like limiting powers over OIC to prevent this sort of catastrophe from happening in the future? I just don't think one person should be deciding on, 300 and whatever billion dollars and who can own what and who can do what and who's a good person and who's a bad person. It doesn't seem like Canada really has a strong democracy.
Well, the shutting down of the House of Commons was, it's ridiculous. It's exactly what Justin Trudeau wants. He gets to, this has been perfect for him. He gets to come out, face a friendly media audience, get no questions of any sort of significance that are challenging, and hand out money, and the people are begging for it. It's a shame. The Conservatives, we needed another party like the NDP or the Bloc to come on side to be able to get, some legitimate abilities to question. And we didn't get that. And we've been pounding the table and asking for Parliament to be recalled in a meaningful way for months. And it's a shame.
It's crazy to me that our House of Commons can be shut down. It's crazy to me that the Prime Minister can enact a federal law and criminally target millions, 2.2 million Canadians with the stroke of a pen, and there's no democratic repercussion, no nothing. You know what I mean? How do we live honestly in a democracy if those things are possible? So I feel like from where I'm standing, because of what's happened to me as a firearms owner, something needs to be done about the OSC. Something needs to be done about our constitution. Something needs to be done about the charter. I don't know what that is or if it's even possible, but it just doesn't seem like a realistic way to govern the country moving forward. Like, this is what's happened with COVID. Well, what happens when the next disease comes along or the next disaster comes along? What, we're just going to shut down Parliament and whoever's the prime minister gets to choose whatever they want? Like, all the folks out there, particularly the Liberal supporters for Trudeau, have been cheering on all these wonderful socialist, policy changes. Guess what? Justin Trudeau is not going to be prime minister forever. And when he's not, the next government is going to be able to rule exactly like he is. And I think there is going to be a bit of payback there on some levels. And that's unfortunately just going to increase the division. I think this is why the Wexit movement is starting to bloom a little bit, is because, if you found a country with true rights, true citizen rights that, ensure everybody's way of life, then there's no fighting over this stuff anymore. And it doesn't matter so much who gets elected, because, you don't have to worry about the next government targeting you criminally. And that's really what it boils down to. We have some folks out there in the Parliament right now who are not interested in accommodating anyone else's life, but their own, anyone else's lifestyle and way of life. And if you're different, you're being labeled an enemy now, publicly, in your job, in the media, and criminally now if you're a firearms owner. So I'm going to challenge you a bit here now, Derek. Let's pretend you win the leadership race. I suspect you are going to face a constant barrage of questions over your views on race, LGBTQ rights, abortion, everything, and that's because you've expressed some socially conservative views. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Everyone should be able to express what they want. But we saw this tactic used against Scheer, and he was really what I would call a teddy bear. He was not aggressive or offensive to anyone in any way, shape, or form. Yet, the Canadian media, funded and very friendly to Justin Trudeau, attacked him on these things. I guess my question to you is, how are you going to navigate those waters in areas like the GTA and Montreal, vital areas where you have to win, but they've been historically had very strong stances on these issues and will respond to media attacks like that?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I believe that Scheer's failure was, in fact, not his personal views, because let's face it, whether you're a social conservative or not, all conservative views are controversial to the liberal media. So his issue was not standing up. And you know what? If you don't stand up, you don't please anybody. And there's a lot of people waiting in the wings that wanted him to just stand on something, stand on some sort of values issue, just give us something. And he never did. So those people wanted to stay home. And of course, the other people who didn't want to vote for us anyways took him to task for it. But, I'll tell you, when it comes to the cities, yes, there's a lot of progressive liberals who have very progressive views. But the new Canadians are very socially conservative. In fact, Doug Ford, who's our conservative premier in Ontario, he swept the GTA when he campaigned a couple of years ago in opposition to radical sex education. So I think there's inroads for us in these large cities by standing on some values.
Let's say you become the next leader of Canada, or the Conservative Party of Canada, and then go on to win the next election and become the Prime Minister. What do you think the first year looks like for Derek Sloan's Canada? If you were in the driver's seat right now, which direction would you take?
Well, listen, first we would have to immediately start implementing some reforms to get the economy back on track. So that means pulling out of the Paris Accord, repealing Bill C-69 and C-48, pulling out of the C-69 and Bill C-48. We have to get the energy sector firing on all cylinders, and of course move towards energy independence. We need to cut taxes for small business. We need to promote Canada First, made in Canada policies. I would reduce immigration from 350,000 people a year to about 150,000 a year. I would give provinces more control over immigration as well. And we would implement a made in Canada manufacturing policy. We need to put Canada first at every step of the way. And we also need to put more funding into our military. So I would start moving Canada into a Canada first mentality. We would be treating our trade relationships with Canada first in mind. China and other countries take advantage of us in a major way when it comes to trade, and we can't be afraid to throw our weight around. When it comes to dealing with the two Michaels over there in China, we need to start arresting some of the espionage and infiltration agents that are on our own soil. And CSIS has put out reports on that for decades, and yet we don't seem to do anything about it. We need an anti-infiltration unit that deals with these type of things. So I've been very clear that I'm okay with protesting, but I'm against violence, and I would declare Antifa a terrorist organization. And we also need to make sure we pull out of the UN signatories that we've signed on to. So the Mass Migration Compact, the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People, which sounds nice in principle, but it gives almost a perpetual veto to energy projects here in Canada. So there's many things that I would do, and I would move quickly to implement these things. We have to get Canada back on track, and I believe Canadians would stand up and stand behind a principled leader who is willing to put Canada first.
Wow, that was a fantastic answer. And it's interesting you brought up veterans, because that's what I wanted to talk to you about next. I'll just play along for fun here. If I was Prime Minister, do you know what I think my first initial action would be? Is I think I changed the anthem back. That was something that really bothered me that Justin Trudeau did. If people want to have a referendum on that and change it again back to how it is now, I would accept the results from that, and it would be fine. But I just don't think one person gets to choose how this country presents itself, and I don't think you get to forget the lives that were given to bring Canada to this place. That was something that was infuriating to me, and I'd like to see that, just as a gesture to show that Canada was back. I guess my final question too would be about veterans. Where do you feel, Canada could improve perhaps on the relationship with our veterans, as well as, the active military as well?
Well, we need more support for veterans, and the almost universal complaint I hear from veterans is that VA or Veterans Affairs is just awful to deal with. And there's so many people that are falling through the cracks. I want to create a committee of veterans to review all the current practices of Veterans Affairs and then implement those changes, because we need to make sure that veteran services are informed by and run by veterans. And I believe that veterans need to have more say and determine policy, not bureaucrats or political consultants.
And I guess in closing then, are there any final thoughts you'd like to give or messages that you'd like to relay to my followers?
Sure. Well, I encourage you to go to my website. I'm the strongest candidate when it comes to almost any issue I can think of, whether it be firearms. I have a plan. You can look at the National Firearms Association debate last night. I have the most aggressive plan to not only repeal what Justin Trudeau has done, but to increase firearm rights for firearms owners. It's not enough to undo what Justin Trudeau has done. We have to actively increase firearms rights. I will put into law strict rules relating to self-defense. We must be able to defend ourselves, particularly in our own homes. And I will also restore handgun hunting and self-protection. That's something that has been the case for many years in Canada, and particularly when you're in wilderness or rural areas, it can be very handy to have handgun carry in the wilderness. If you're swinging an axe or using a chainsaw or something like that, it's nice to be able to have your sidearm on you, and there's many reasons why that would be a good idea. So check out my plan on my website. I'm the strongest on Canadian sovereignty, on dealing with China, on veterans issues, on firearms, on free speech, which we didn't even get to talk about. But I have a great plan that actually deals with fighting the censorship we're seeing in social media. But I've been, and even individual rights. I'm against mandatory vaccinations, for example. I believe that parents should have the right to decide what their children are taught and what kind of medical procedures are performed on kids. So I'm the strongest when it comes to these. I'm the most unapologetically conservative. I haven't backed down, even though my career's been on the line, and I'll never back down when it comes to standing up for Canada and conservative values. You can trust me for your number one vote, and I thank you for listening to this podcast, and please continue to support it.
Wow, that was a fantastic answer, Derek. And once again, it's interesting. You kind of read mind, because I'm in the process of applying for my wilderness authorization to carry, because I'm a licensed guide. I go out and I guide bear hunts. I'm in the wilderness on, for the most part in really dense brush, lots of deadfalls. It's very difficult to handle a rifle, particularly when you're, say, coming up on a wounded animal, or in dense brush where there are large bears, sows with cubs, grizzlies, and black bears. It is a very dangerous situation, and there is a legal avenue right now to apply because this is my employment and I can go through it. But I'll tell you what, it is serious hoops. I got to take a course of fire to prove my accuracy. I'll be fine on that. I'm a pretty good shooter, but I have to get insurance, both in my home province or my home territory, as well as the provinces that I guide in. I also have to speak with COs. I had to take a wilderness and bear safety course. Like, there is so much stuff I have to go through, and it's not even guaranteed at this point that I'll be approved. And the chief firearms officer instructed me that they would only approve me for a very specific class of or way of wilderness carry. I would have to have a hip holster with a revolver. He basically said anything else just automatically gets denied. That said, I've heard some helicopter pilots have been able to get wilderness carry with a Glock 20. It's a large caliber semi-auto, but he said don't even bother unless you're going to go for a revolver. And the bottom line is, the people in urban Canada, they see this gun violence and these gangs and the shooting, and they just don't get it. But there's a whole other portion of Canada where we're out there, and it's you and a bear, and that bear is not liking you there. And I can't tell you how many times I really wish I'd had a large caliber pistol on me. I completely agree with you, and I thank you so much for bringing that up.
Well, thank you. And you just raise a great point that we have to really command the narrative when it comes to the issue with guns, because we know it's not the licensed gun owners that are committing these crimes, and they're not even buying guns for the criminals that are. The vast majority of guns that are used in crimes are smuggled in, and they're used by people who are not licensed. The OIC that Justin Trudeau brought in wouldn't have prevented this issue in Nova Scotia. It wouldn't have. I mean, this guy didn't have a license anyways, which means that right off the bat, all of his guns are illegal. And many of the guns that he had were actually from the States. So we really have to look at this realistically and not be afraid to tell the truth.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Derek, for coming on, and it was a pleasure to have you. And don't be a stranger. Reach out to me anytime, all right?
Glad to be here. Thank you so much.